Glenn Greenwald, who obviously broke the Snowden revelations. He is obviously a major advocate for the pardoning of Edward Snowden by the United States. He's also an advocate for the pardoning of Julian Assange. And he went on Breaking Points this week to discuss his former source. And he floated a theory that I thought was quite interesting. And it's the kind of thing that I was surprised to hear him float, because Greenwald, whether you agree with a lot of what he says or don't, he says a lot of controversial things now. He's a bit of a troll now. He says things that he knows is going to, get people mad at him.
Sure.
So whatever your feelings are on that stuff, he's certainly a credible source of information.
We should talk.
Right, exactly. Right. Right. Unlike us. He's very controversial, right?
We keep it right down the middle, yeah.
Exactly. But he is a credible source of information. Like, he is a serious journalist. He is a serious reporter. He doesn't dabble in conspiracy theories that he cannot substantiate when pressed. And so it was really interesting that he brought up that in the final days of the Trump presidency, while he was being impeached over January 6th, there were Republican senators who held that impeachment over his head, threatening to vote guilty if he pardoned Edward Snowden. So let's hear him make this case.
It was the Trump administration considering actively pardoning Snowden. I think it was one of Trump's more cowardly moves not to have done that. The reason he didn't was because the second impeachment trial was hanging over his head, and Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham made clear, and Mitch McConnell, if you pardon Snowden, we're going to vote for your own impeachment. But he didn't, and now the Biden administration, was a part of the Obama administration, is continuing this repressive attack on whistleblowers that led to Snowden not being able to come back to the United States in the first place.
Yep.
I had never heard that before, Glenn, that there was a threat from Rubio and Graham and some of the more hawkish pro-security state Republicans to potentially vote to convict Trump in that impeachment hearing over Snowden. Is there, just explain that a little bit more to me, because that's a new piece of information for me.
Yeah. So, obviously I was somebody who was working very actively, both publicly advocating, but also in private, doing everything I could to secure a pardon for both Assange and Snowden being my source and Assange being someone I regard as heroic. And there was a real movement inside the Trump administration to give particularly Snowden a pardon. They came much closer to Snowden than they did to Assange. And if you think about it, why would they have initiated an impeachment proceeding against a president who within a couple of weeks was on his way out? And the reason, Crystal, was that they were very afraid that on his way out, Trump was going to do a bunch of stuff, including not just giving pardons to Snowden and Assange, but also declassify all kinds of documents he had been threatening to declassify about the CIA, about the Kennedy assassination. And the only leverage they had against Trump doing what they considered crazy stuff on his way out was the second impeachment trial. And they explicitly communicated to Trump, multiple Republican kind of hawkish senators did, that if you do what we know you're thinking about doing, what Rand Paul and Matt Gaetz and others were encouraging him to do, which was pardon Snowden, that will severely jeopardize your chances of getting out of this impeachment trial with an acquittal. And that was the kind of sword of Damocles hanging over his head during that transition.
All right. So there you have it. That is pretty interesting stuff. And if he has information that would corroborate that story, it would be great to have that out in the public. Like I said, he is a trustworthy source of information. I think he is one of the premier journalists in the world, whether you agree with him on things or not. So I think he has enough integrity to the point where I trust him as a source. So if he says it, and he doubled down, because if you noticed, Crystal Ball says, wait a minute, hold on, I didn't hear that. Can you explain that more? And he said, sure, absolutely. And he just went right into it. He's the kind of guy who comes with the facts. He comes knowing his shit. He's never going to be knocked off balance by any sort of inquiry like that. So I take him at his word on that, and that is a very, very interesting revelation, assuming it's true, which, again, I do, because I trust the source in this case. And so this really flies in the face because, some people on the left, including Crystal's future husband there, has made the point that, well, Trump, yeah, he talks like a populist. He's a fake populist. He's this and that. He really governed like a mainstream Republican. He really governed like Mitt Romney, right, would have governed. And that's true in certain like domestic examples, right? The tax cuts for the rich, the deregulation, blah, blah, blah. But there is a whole realm of policy in which Trump really was a unique threat to the bipartisan consensus, especially the military-industrial complex and the national security state. Now, I know what everybody's going to say. Oh, how can you say he was a threat to the military when he beefed up their budget? Well, yes, he beefed their budget up. He rebuilt the military. We have big, beautiful planes, right? We have all this. But then he would add, and we hope we never have to use them. Well, no, that ain't going to fly with the military. That doesn't fly with the Pentagon. No, you have to use them, schmuck. If you don't use them, there's no demand to make more of them. Right? Exactly. And he didn't give them the war that they wanted with Russia and Ukraine, right? We didn't have to keep making weapons to send out to Ukraine to fight the proxy war with Russia, right? So he was very, very disruptive in that way. And of course, extremely disruptive in this way. They would not have had to worry about Mitt Romney pardoning Edward Snowden on the way out the door. They would have had no worries about that whatsoever. The fact that
much
they
less
were
the
concerned,
JFK files.
The JFK file, right? Trump is a conspiracy theorist. We know this. He talks like a conspiracy theorist. He functions as a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, there is this idea that on the way out the door, he might choose to, declassify certain things. And that's actually one of the follow-up questions that Greenwald got to that is, does that have anything to do with the documents in his basement that he took and kept at Mar-a-Lago, right? Some of the stuff that he maybe would have released if he wasn't leaned on by the sort of centrist GOPers, Rubio, Graham, things like that. It's really interesting. It's really interesting, and it says a lot about the threat that Donald Trump was to the system and whether or not they will indict him. I heard Matt Christman from Chapo. I think this was an interview he gave to Crystal and Kyle, where he made this great point. He said, there's this precedent and this sort of tradition of not indicting a commander-in-chief, not indicting someone when they're either in office or once they leave the Oval Office. And part of the reason you don't indict presidents is because presidents are basically hired to commit crimes. That was the point he said. And so it makes sense that, like, if we're going to go and actually prosecute these people for the crimes we hire them to do, then nobody's going to want the job, because basically to run for that office is to volunteer to spend the rest of your life in a jail cell once you leave office. And so that's why we tend to not want to go there. The question is Donald Trump so disruptive that they will break that tradition and take a chance and go ahead and do it?
Yes.
And we're at a point right now where if what Greenwald is saying is true there, and like I said, I don't have any reason to doubt him because his word is always very, very good, then the answer might be yes. They might actually break and indict him.
Yeah, I think Trump is that destructive and disruptive, and that's why they're going to prosecute him. They are not going to take any chances that he's going to get back in office. And if he does run, even though, look, my money's on DeSantis, part of my logic in betting on DeSantis is that they're going to make sure that Trump can't run. If he did run against DeSantis, I don't think it's as foregone a conclusion that Trump would win as a lot of people think. But look, I mean, you have to say, looking at the numbers, advantage Trump. I just think a lot of things can happen over the course of a campaign. They're just not going to take that chance because DeSantis does not strike me as a guy who's they're going to have to worry is going to pardon Snowden. So they'd rather have him than have Trump. They are going to knock out Trump, especially when you look at how weak the potential Democratic field is. Unless there's some dark horse that we're not thinking of, you're almost definitely going to get a Republican president in 2024. So when you select the Republican nominee, you're probably selecting the president. They can't have that be Donald Trump. They cannot. They're going to prosecute him for that reason.
No, I mean, I think that's probably true. And I think that this piece of sound that we just played is evidence for that there was real pressure being applied to Trump. And look, this explains why they went after him for every little thing. You know, Sean Hannity put up a graphic that he thought was sort of owning the libs for going after Trump on too much, listing like dozens of offenses that they've investigated him for. Of course, that is a reflection on the many offenses of Donald Trump. So in one sense, that was a bit of a cell phone on his part.
Right.
In another sense, though, they have a point. Like, he's not the first president to do a lot of terrible shit and get away with it. I mean, you could list those offenses for just about anyone.
Well,
especially George W. Bush.
George Bush gets to dance with Ellen, right?
Exactly.
He gets rehabilitated by the liberal class. That's for me.
The only go ahead.
That for me is the smoking gun where I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear from the same fucking people who, you know, get all teary-eyed about Bush sharing a fucking candy with Michelle at a funeral, about what an abhorrent president Donald Trump was. I don't want to fucking hear it from you. If you can stomach George Bush, if you're going to swallow the media rehabilitation of the worst president of our lifetime, bar none, then I can't take you seriously when you're talking about how horrible Trump is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. And one thing that I would add is that, you know, part of the reason they are so aggressive in going after Trump, and if these threats were made to him by members of his own party, that they will vote to convict if you do anything to cross the national security state in the last days. That shows what we've all kind of sensed, which is like the only way to go after Trump is to make it personal and threaten him personally, threaten him with jail time, because he's totally unaccountable to all of these other institutions. He's just a wild card. So you can't threaten him in any other way but to actually put him in a corner, you know, and say, listen, we're going to lock you in a cage if you fuck with us here. And that is essentially what they did to him throughout his entire time in office. Right? I mean, they never got off his ass about anything. They were always threatening to put the fucking guy in jail, and now they're still threatening. And the reason they might actually make this kind of move is, like you said, just to take him off of the board.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Exactly.
That's what they laid on him in a back room in the Senate. My question, I don't doubt Greenwald's reporting. My question is really, well, why didn't he just do it on his last day? I mean, Bill Clinton, pardoned everybody, whoever gave him money behind a fucking bus station bathroom on his last day in office.
Well, he's a pussy. He's a coward. That's what Greenwald said. And look, he has no moral conviction. Like, Trump doesn't care that Edward Snowden is, living in exile unjustly, or that, Julian Assange is being tortured to death unjustly. What the hell does Donald Trump care about that? He doesn't care. He figures, all right, my life will be easier if I don't do this. I guess I won't do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, he's not going to take a moral stand for fucking anything. So, like, if they threaten to vote yes on impeachment, what that reads to Trump as is, well, they're going to give me problems if I do this.
Right.
And it's not worth the trouble. So why do it?
Please clap.